Sampling old drum breaks is a great way to get that authentic 90s boom bap style of drums. But what if we could use some of the sounds that we already have in our own drum library and still achieve like a similar type of feel? There's a few key components that we need to focus on, which is exactly what I want to go over in today's video. And that way you can start making beats that, Joey Badass, J. Cole, and Doechii would love to rap over. Let's take a look at how. So let's say that we found a cool sample like this and we wanted to just put some drums behind it, right? Just begging for those drums, right? Now I just pulled out a few different samples that I think would sound kind of cool just to create sort of a nice starting point for us. So here's what we've got, just a basic kick snare hat. So what I really like to do in this scenario to get that kind of authentic sound is to first put it into a drum rack so we can kind of simulate, what it was like sampling on older samplers, right? You just have these pads that we can use. Now you'll notice when I hit this kick here, there's kind of all that extra stuff at the end, and that's actually okay because this is the type of thing that would be in like an old school boom bap groove. They leave in some of this extra stuff. The next thing I kind of like to do is if you go to the top left part of the drum rack, you can actually see all of your macros, which is nice to be able to control multiple things at the same time. So what I really like to do is, like, say on our kick here, I'm just going to right click on the volume to velocity, and I'm going to go to map to macro 1 here. And then what I'm going to do is right click and go to map to all siblings. So now you'll see the snare and the hat all have this particular parameter mapped to the first macro, which is nice because now when I turn this down, it will turn them down for every single one of our hits, which is great. What I like to do is turn this all the way down to 0, so that way every single hit is going to sound the exact same. The next thing I'm going to do is create kind of like a ghost kick. So I'm going to create a copy of our kick right here. So I'm going to hold Alt and just drag this over to C#3. On this particular kick, I'm going to bring down the volume by about 12 in comparison, okay? And this is going to be kind of the shuffle kick, which is great because since we turned off the volume to velocity, now the shuffle kick is going to be a really consistent volume, which is pretty nice when you're actually playing these in by hand, which is what we'll do next. Yeah, I kind of like this one here. And now I'm just going to move our shuffle kick onto the ghost kick that we created earlier. The nice thing about having an alt kick set up already is that not only can you make it quieter than the original kick, but you can also add like a little filter in there too. Because when you play things quieter, there's less high frequency information typically. And so another way that you can kind of, imply that to the listener is that, they're hitting it quieter. So it's a little bit more muffled with a low pass filter, which is a really nice kind of subtle touch to add on to things here. Now, as I add in this hat, I'm just going to turn this little plus sign on so we can record over what we've already got without erasing anything. So I think I kind of like that second half here. So the next thing I like to do is to kind of put myself in the position of being an engineer recording those old drums. And a lot of those drums are going to be recorded to tape. And so that's the first thing that I like to use for processing. And there's this plugin, this stock plugin called Dynamic Tube, which is awesome inside of Ableton. There's a preset called Hot Driven Tape, and you can use any sort of tape emulation for this that you want. But this thing just sounds great. So check out what this does. It has this really nice kind of subtle drive on the transients that I really like. Another really great strategy to make these separate drum sounds from all these different kits sound like they're part of the same family is to filter them all the same exact way. And so it's really easy to do this with a drum rack setup because you can just add in a filter of any kind over the top of everything and it will apply it all at the same time, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this auto filter just because I like some of the analog style filters we have access to. So I'm gonna change this from 24 decibels per octave to 12 and just kind of dampen these drums a little bit. Ready to this? Because they kind of need to be dark and gritty anyway, but this way they all kind of sound like they were recorded in a similar space, and they sound like they belong together a little bit more. The other thing too is that a lot of these drum sounds were very lively, so they had some space on there, and so that's the next thing that I want to add in order to get that authentic sound here. So what I'm going to do is I just click this little hamburger icon here, and you can see that it opened this chains list here. It shows all of our samples that we're working with right now, and the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click this little return button on the bottom so that we can create a new effect. In this case, it's going to be reverb that we can send some of the sounds that we have already set up in our drum rack. So if I type in, like, if we get like a convolution reverb, which has been my favorite thing to use lately, and I'm going to set this to be 100% wet. And what we're trying to do is kind of recreate a live drum sound. So let's choose, I'm going to go to the type, and I'm going to go to made for drums. And then there is this one called BM7 snare plate A. Okay. And now if I go back to the left side of the drum rack and I click this little S, you can see that it's opened up some little sends for us to send each of these drum sounds to the reverb, which is another great reason to use a drum rack because now we can actually send them individually versus as a group in the normal sends and returns inside of Ableton. Okay, so let's start with the snare here. And I'm actually going to decrease the size of this as well. Yes, keep it lively, but also short. We'll do the same thing with our kick. Something pretty subtle. And also with our hat. If you want to get an even more old school style sound, you can make the reverb mono so that it doesn't sound too high fidelity and modern. So I just bring the width all the way down, and now you have this mono reverb. Yeah. Of course, compression was also a very important part of the sound back then. And so I'm going to create our own compression return inside of Ableton here. And I'm going to use my all-time favorite compressor, which is this glue compressor, kind of an SSL style compression. And I'm going to set the release as quick as it can go and the ratio very high at 10:1 here. And then I'm going to bring down the threshold after I send our drum rack to this compression here so we can get some parallel compression going. Now, if I solo this compression here, this is kind of the sound you want. Really pumping hard. Because we're gonna mix it back in with the original here. Okay, so if I unsolo the compression, and we just slowly bring it in. And also, if you're feeling like it's a little too dark, you can always, use a little EQ and brighten up whatever spot you want. Sometimes 5K is kind of a nice place to do that. The other thing I'm going to do too is you can hear that this snare has kind of its own space inside of the sample. And so I'm just going to tighten up these flags here so we can, make sure that the space of the snare sample isn't clashing with the space that we've chosen for our own drums. So now if we take a listen to what this sounds like with our sample here. And there you go. We've got some amazing boom bap style drums. And to think, how different it sounds from the very beginning, right? So if we take off all our processing. To this now. Sounds completely transformed and again, much more cohesive, but just using some of the samples that we have in our own library. So if you go ahead and follow that procedure that I outlined with the parallel compression and the tape emulation and some of the EQ and filtering that we use, you're going to be well on your way to creating that authentic boom bap style sound that's always going to be popular and is always really fun to be creative with. Now, if you guys have any questions about this whole process, please let me know down in a comment below. I'd be happy to answer. And as always, happy music making, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care. Peace.